Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody. On the Senate Transportation Committee. It's Friday, March 25th. And we're taking up an issue this morning. I was asked yesterday from Associated General Contractors, Matt Musgrave, of an issue, and I wanted to make sure it pertained to transportation. So I think we have someone here from the agency. So Matt, would you like to lead off and tell us what this issue is?
Sure, and thank you very much. For the record, my name is Matt Musgrave. I'm with the Associated General Contractors of Vermont. We represent road and bridge builders across the state. You'll have to pardon me, I just ran out to my car to grab my blazer and I'm out of breath. So our primary job in Vermont is, is the maintenance and road work that you see out there. And as you know, on this committee, it's crucial to not only the health and safety of Vermonters, but just travel in general to everybody else. We wanted to come in and talk about H466. It's the Interbasin Surface Transfer of Water bill. And I've followed this bill for a couple of years. And we all understand this bill in the past to have been the ski area bill. And we called it the ski area bill because the original intent of a study group that was created out of a policy that was passed last year was intending to study a situation where Killington Ski Resort acquired Pico Ski Resort and was transmitting water for snowmaking from one watershed to the other. And some environmental groups felt that that needed some study, so they put together a study group. And during that study group, they identified one major challenge that they had was they didn't understand who was using surface waters in the state of Vermont. Surface waters being rivers, streams, lakes, and other water bodies that are generally supplied by rainwater. The bill doesn't address groundwater of any type. It specifically addresses surface water. And what the study committee identified was that because they had no inventory of what people were using, they didn't know what and how or if they should regulate. So the first part of the bill, as it's passed out of the House, includes a required registration system with the Agency of Natural Resources for individuals that are using 5,000 or more gallons per day. That policy has a threshold of 50,000 gallons that changes it from estimating on an annual basis to metering that water usage if you're using more than 50,000 gallons. That data is intended to go back to A&R to help them understand the challenges and make recommendations for the second part of the bill, which is a permitting scheme for individuals that are using surface water. And it's a very broad permit. It has some prescriptive language, but it leaves very little, it leaves a lot of leeway for the agency to create those permitting rules. The challenge that we see with that process is that we're essentially handing over permitting authority to that agency without actually knowing whether or if there is a problem that they need to solve. So we actually, and the third part of the bill, it addresses permitting related to the interbasin transfer of water, meaning if you were taking water out of the Lake Champlain Basin and sending it over to the Connecticut River Basin as an example. The third part of the bill in general wouldn't apply to anything that we're doing. We're not transferring water as contractors from one basin to the other. I can explain to you pretty simply how we're using water currently. And it's three different ways, and it's ways that we are unable to avoid. The first one is required by the Federal Clean Air Act. It's dust mitigation. When you see those tanker trucks that are spraying water on subsurface soil or dirt roads, that's intended to mitigate for clean air. And that keeps substances like silica, which is a precursor to causing lung cancer, out of the air. The second reason we use water, again with those same tanker trucks, is for soil compaction for subsurfaces to lay down asphalt so that it will last for a very long time and remain safe. The third reason why we're using that water is coolant for our asphalt rollers. I've gone and done some research. During my research, I polled every one of our road and bridge builders, and I found that in general, you're not seeing, and with no exception, no estimate has increased usage over 20,000 gallons per day. And that usage and that withdrawal from the waters in the areas that they're going to actually would be considered de minimis under what existing rules and statutes are, because the usage of that water is so low that it's not actually impacting the stream, river, lake, or pond. And I say that with confidence because the rivers and lakes and ponds that they fill these trucks up in are generally healthy flowing. They don't go to little trout ponds or sediment-rich ponds or river or streams, because that will hurt and damage their equipment. They're looking for the cleanest water possible. They're looking for water that they can extract that's not going to damage any of the waterways out there. And again, they're well below the threshold that the bill already sets out as a significant amount of water. So where are our challenges with this bill? We're absolutely fine. I've explained to my colleagues the importance of clean water. And as a matter of fact, many of my members are fisher people. They enjoy the waterways, whether they're kayak, trout fishing, bass fishing. They understand that value in Vermont and are willing to participate in a registration system where they're able to report annually estimates of their water usage to A&R, so that A&R can take that information, aggregate it, and create policy for users that are above a de minimis level, like contractors. My challenge with the bill is right now we have essentially a registration and reporting system that we can support, but that then turns into a permitting system that we're essentially handing over to A&R to create those permits with very little sideboards on those, with having done absolutely no research. And anyone that's testified to as a proponent to this bill will say, and you can review, they claim to have no idea who's using water, and that's fine. We understand how much we're using and that we can't get away from using it. We testified last week or earlier this week in Senate Natural Resources and asked for a carve out for road and bridge work, whether it be for the state or a municipality. The reason why we asked for that, number one, is the permitting process it can be quite challenging. Our members are already dealing with a number of permits, but when you think about this,
members and guests are prohibited from using computers.
Mr. O'Grady, I think you have some people in the background.
Jean, can you mute Michael O'Grady?
Have to make notes and conversation during a roll call.
Mr. O'Grady, I've muted you.
There you go.
So I fell off there. So let me bring it back. Sorry, I was distracted there. So where we're going with this is we think that a permitting process for the de minimis use of water that we are using would be so complicated because, number one, we don't use water every single day. We don't go to the same location for water. We don't use it for the same purpose. Oftentimes, one extraction can be for 3 different uses. So when we think about the complexity of the permitting system, with due respect to the Agency of Natural Resources, I've never heard anyone say that getting a permit is easy. We also are aware that when we work with the Agency of Transportation, in normal times, we're bound by deadlines that we must meet. If we miss those deadlines, the agency will charge us back money that was awarded within the bid. And that's a significant cost to contractors that if they can't control that timing because we had another permit in that has a major complex factor, we have a major challenge with that. The other side.
Question, Matt. Did you present this same testimony in the House when they were taking up the bill?
I'm going to be very careful here to not insult the process that this bill went through. But as I said in the very beginning of my testimony, we all understood this to be the ski area bill. And this went through the House within 2 weeks at the beginning of this session. This does have a financial component, and I'm aware it didn't even make it over to Ways and Means as within Rule 35A. So it's my apologies now that this one hit us out of nowhere because the name of the bill is not germane to the majority of the policy. So we were very happy that the Senate was allowing us to come in because this thing is moving so fast. And over in natural resources right now, we have the farmers who are excluded from any House testimony and after asking for it. You have the golf courses that are opposing this bill. You have a number of different groups that are coming out of the woodwork. And I say this with all due respect, and I blame it on COVID, not people, that the working group that met over the summer and the fall should have done a much better job in finding out who the stakeholders were so that we wouldn't be before you today looking for individual carve-outs where there are pieces of the policy that would cause not only economic harm, but also in the world of the farmers, help to a community. So I do apologize that we're bringing this to you now.
Senator Ingalls.
Matt, because you touched upon it, you seem to know about it. Because I looked at the bill last night real quick, but do you know who else does this harm, or who does it impact? It might not harm anybody, but who does it impact?
So that's the problem. Conservation Law Foundation testified last week that they absolutely have no idea who this will harm. And that was the purpose for creating the registration system so that they would report, because they don't know who those are. And I will profess to you that I don't know who the other individuals are. I can name a few. Right now, I'm standing before you talking about major delays to road construction and bridge construction. We have, as I'm speaking to you now, the Golf Course Association is begging the Senate Natural Resource Committee to not institute a permit program until they've done a study. And the farmers are desperately pleading right now to help them avoid something that will be a heavy burden. To answer your question, Senator Ingalls, no one knows.
Yes, Senator Purcell.
Yeah, Mr. Musgrave. So right now, the contractors pull water out just kind of wherever they can, where not, wherever they can, but where they think the best places are. There's no regulations now. It's just like wherever you can get the water, you can pull it out, or there are some requirements now.
So there currently aren't any requirements, and the withdrawals that they're making are currently recognized as de minimis. In that they're not impacting the waterways. That wouldn't be a de minimis use if they went upstream to, like, say, a little trickling trout river or something like that and drained it dry. There is actually a relatively complex calculation that gets to de minimis. And I know Mr. O'Grady is muted. I'm unmuting him here, or he is muted, but he may have a little bit more data on that. But
That's
to
okay.
answer your question,
I don't need the details, but then. Or do you know if they're pulling them out of dry hydrants, or are they putting hoses in the water and pulling it out that way?
There's a variety of ways that they're pulling water. And generally, they look for the places that the fire departments are going to already, because they have a system that they can plug into. And again, they have to be very careful about where they go. Number one, they do care about the environment. But number two, they care about their equipment, because it's very expensive. So they need to make sure it's clean water that they're using.
So they do use fire department's dry hydrants.
I don't know that they use those fire hydrants, but I do know that I've seen them pulled over, filling up in those pull-off spots.
Those dry hydrants. And then, okay. I wonder, do you know if they talk to the fire departments before they use those dry hydrants?
I don't know the answer to that.
Imagine.
Well, Matt, like I said to you, I just want to see how the Agency of Transportation, I know the bill is in Natural Resources, I believe, in the Senate, and how we fit into the picture. So we have a couple of folks here from AOT. Andrea Wright is one, and we have Michelle also with us this morning.
Yes, she is.
So would you like to offer some input, Andrea?
Yeah, sure. I don't think I can add too much more. For the record, I'm Andrea Wright. I'm the Environmental Policy Manager at V-Trans. Matt's testimony was quite comprehensive, so there's not a lot more to add. One thing I will add just for reference, and we did some calculations ourselves about how much usage we have in a typical year. And for reference, calculated out for our entire program over 1 year through all of our projects, so spread out all throughout the state and thus through a lot of different sources. The withdrawal is about equal. It can range quite a bit, obviously, with weather conditions and the type of projects that are in construction for that year, but about on par with one ski area, which is likely from one source. So just wanted to provide that level of reference for you. And then I'll just say VTrans's general position is that the legislation and the creation of the new regulatory burden is not really commensurate with the magnitude of withdrawal coming from transportation construction projects. Most often that's de minimis volume, as Matt said, and a duration that is not very long. It's non-deleterious to the surface water, and as Matt mentioned, it's in direct conflict to human health and safety regulations and engineering standards that really can't be compromised on our projects. The permitting process is a concern because with any type of permitting, there's a potential added time and resource needs. One such as this might be more accurately submitted by a contractor. The permit might be acquired by the contractor rather than VTrans. Usually VTrans gets the permits during design, and the risk of delay during construction has a much greater impact to the project schedule and getting the work complete. That, along with the concept of needing a permit for activities that are required by other state and federal requirements and engineering standards that can't be compromised, are the reasons VTrans would prefer to have language in the bill that accepts highway construction and maintenance activities from permitting requirement. We understand this could be addressed during rulemaking, and we're open to that, but it certainly would be preferable to secure the language in the bill rather than go through rulemaking. And I don't think I can add much more than what Matt said, so happy to answer any more questions that you might have.
Question, for the committee?
Well, my only comment about rulemaking is that rules are only supposed to be approved if they're consistent with legislative intent. And in the absence of any expressed intent regarding this particular use of water withdrawal, I think adds to uncertainty in terms of what those rules could look like.
Exactly.
Joe, anything you want to add?
No, that's
Okay.
that.
All right, thank you.
That was more of a comment about rulemaking. It can't be arbitrary and it's got to be consistent with legislative intent. So if you have somebody says, well, we think it should come under this before it's during the comment period, it just puts the LCAR folk in a kind of a bind in the absence of anything specific.
So Matt, how are you doing across the hall with natural resources? Have you had a testimony there like you gave us this morning?
Yes, thank you. And that's why I had my hand raised, because I am pursuing some language over in that committee. And that's why I approached you today, was that I believe that they will give consideration to my language. I do know that there are some folks that are opposed to having an exception language written in there, but I did make a proposal to the committee, and I hope that they will consider it. And that proposal exists on page 12 of the bill under subsection D, exceptions. I requested that they change that language, and I put it in my written testimony to you as well, that a permit required under the subchapter shall not be required for surface water withdrawals for fire suppression or other public emergency response purposes and state or municipal highway construction projects and maintenance activities. And my request for this committee is, if the Senate Natural Resources Committee does not add that to the bill, that someone consider making that an amendment from this committee, and or ask that the permit process be delayed until the study has been completed. Thank you.
Michael O'Grady, you would like to join us this morning?
Good morning. I'm not sure if you want to hear from me or not, but I do have some input that I could provide. The bill did originally start on this study committee due to issues around the interbasin transfer for snowmaking. But during the conversation that led to the bill that created the study committee, it was realized that the state is one of the few eastern states that does not actually regulate a withdrawal of water from surface waters. There is no specific regulatory permitting program. Instead, there is a procedure which is actually applicable to contractors and to AOT, but which is probably not followed. And the procedure provides, as Matt referenced, a formula for what is a de minimis calculation or a de minimis withdrawal. I doubt that every surface water withdrawal is calculating that formula, which is one of the reasons that led to the creation of the study committee. The study committee did recommend, as Matt referenced, basically a three-part system: a registration, a reporting, and a permitting. The permitting would be set in rulemaking. There are directives, articulable standards for what would be in the rule. One of the things that would be in the rule would be general permitting. And that's how I expect, if this bill were to go forward and the rulemaking were to go forward, that withdrawals by contractors and withdrawals by AOT would be addressed. You would not necessarily need to get a permit for every activity, but the activity would be regulated by conditions. And I don't know if you all know what a general permit is. Instead of issuing an individual permit for each individual withdrawal, the agency identifies a category of like withdrawals and establishes conditions and requirements for that. And all the regulated entity needs to do is comply with those conditions and then notify A&R that they are engaged in that. It likely won't be that onerous. It likely won't delay an activity. And that's usually why general permits are used, to take away that administrative bureaucracy or burden. The threshold levels are low. The study group indicated that they are low for a reason. And they are low for a reason because they, as Matt referenced, don't know where surface water is being withdrawn. And the study committee wanted the agency to develop basically a universe or a known universe of the use of surface water. With that said, the threshold levels in other states are much different. 20,000 is usually the minimum. And some states, for example, New York, it's 100,000, especially for agriculture. For example, agriculture in New York, they register on an average 100,000 gallon withdrawal over a 30-day period. So that's I think the thresholds are creating some anxiety. I think the system for the permitting through creating it through rule is creating some anxiety. And I understand that anxiety, but I do think much of it would be addressed through general permitting under the rule.
Mr. O'Grady, if I may ask you a question on that last point regarding thresholds. I haven't seen this bill yet. I've just been told about it now. So you said it, I apologize for not recalling, but what is the threshold in this bill? And then to your comparisons to other states, do other states have variable thresholds for agriculture versus road projects versus ski slopes? Have you seen that?
So the threshold in the bill for registration and reporting is 5,000 gallons a day. One of the concerns is that it doesn't specify if it's 5,000 gallons a day averaged over a certain time period or 5,000 gallons a day at any time during the year. So that's creating some questions as well. Other states do have variable thresholds based on first what type of activity is regulated. For example, if it's just registration, many states have a lower threshold for registration or reporting, 20,000, for example. But then for permitting, it could go up to a higher threshold. Some states do have variable thresholds, usually for agriculture, or different types of variation of the regulation. For example, in New York, again, as an example, agriculture does not need a permit. It just needs to register.
At least 5,000 gallons. How would you know when you ask for 5,000 or less? I mean, how would anybody know what they're drawing?
That is addressed in the bill. They are supposed to, if it's under 50,000 gallons a day, or expected to be under 50,000 gallons a day, they are allowed to estimate whether or not they are withdrawing, or the amount that they are withdrawing. They could also provide meter data. If it's over 50,000 gallons a day, they're supposed to provide meter data. So basically a gauge on the withdrawal infrastructure.
So it's, if I heard you correctly, that the neighboring states, the lowest you've seen is 20,000, and this current bill has got us at 5,000, and it's unclear as to whether or not that's an average daily, 5,000 max for the life of the project in one day. And it also, from Matt Musgrave's testimony, it's that this bill sort of became something more than it originally was, and it has been moving so fast in the process, not all interested parties have caught it. In your, I'm relatively new around here. With these concerns raised, should this in fact be sort of put onto to more exploration, more thought, and brought back next biennium, so that we get this right, we don't have bad legislation? I doubt you're going to offer the opinion, Mr. O'Grady, but if you contradict that what you said was that other states, the lowest is 20,000, and we're proposing 5,000. I'd like to verify that that's what I heard you say.
So you asked a couple of different questions. The bill did initiate with the issue of interbasin transfer, but the conversation quickly was expanded to not just interbasin transfer. So it wasn't just about snowmaking, and the title of the bill, this bill and the other bill, is about surface water withdrawal and interbasin transfer. So it wasn't just about the snowmaking interbasin transfers. I did say that the other states that I know of, the lowest is 20,000 gallons, New Hampshire, Maine, and this threshold is 5,000 gallons. As to whether or not you need another study or further analysis, that's really a policy decision.
Thank you.
For you.
Any other further questions?
Yes, Mike, is Ag Committee taking this up as well?
They have already heard testimony from generally the fruit and vegetable growers. Irrigation of animals directly from a surface water is exempt. Irrigation ponds that aren't connected to state surface water subject to the Vermont water quality standards are also exempt. In addition, many of the livestock farms use wells, and wells are under another program in which farming is exempt. So it really is an issue for the fruit and vegetable growers, and Senate Agriculture did hear testimony from those interested parties. They are very concerned. They are concerned about the thresholds. They're concerned about the daily average, or whether it's a one-time. They are concerned about permitting, the burden of it, and they're just concerned.
Obviously, when you use a daily average, if you're talking about snowmaking, and they're able to take 5,000 or whatever against 365 days a year, and when it's a much more compressed period of time, you can get, or I suppose in the summer when you're growing vegetables, that you have just seasonal demands here that could really make a big difference in terms of whether you hit that threshold or not.
Sure. And I want to clarify that the bill addresses interbasin transfers for snowmaking. So between the Lake Champlain Basin and, say, the Connecticut Basin, withdrawal from Champlain to taking it over to the Connecticut Basin. Other snowmaking withdrawals are already regulated and permitted. They have been for decades.
Okay.
So that, just Killington withdrawing from a surface water reservoir in their basin, that's already regulated. It's already permitted. This isn't addressing that specifically. Well, it does address it, but it basically says that it will continue to be regulated as it is. But you are correct, Senator Kitchell, that duration, type of activity, type of withdrawal, the intensity in any particular season all play into the type of regulatory scheme that would need to be developed. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why people are asking for an average. Going back to New York again, for farmers, I said that they have to register at 100,000 gallons a day, averaged over a 30-day period. Well, that means that they have to be withdrawing 3 million gallons in a 30-day period, right? In order to get an average of 100,000 gallons a day. I mean, that goes right to your point of intensity and type of use and seasonal use, et cetera. And so if you implement that type of standard, I do think it also addresses some of the anxiety regarding the regulated activity. For example, if you're a construction developer and you need it for dust suppression and the threshold is 20,000 gallons a day averaged over a 30-day period, you might not even trigger the permit.
Interbasin transfer. So wouldn't a lot of these withdrawals not involve an interbasin transfer?
Right. So there are two different components. There's just taking the water out of any surface water. That's a surface water withdrawal.
Uh-huh.
And then a surface water withdrawal, which takes the water out of one basin, takes it out of Champlain and takes that water through piping or trucking to, say, the Hudson River Basin. That's an interbasin transfer. So two different types of activities that would be regulated.
Couldn't it have a cutout in a permit that you were taking water from so many miles from the deposit site? Like if you're up in Lunenburg and you say, okay, well, within 12 miles from this project site, we're going to apply this water back to the earth. I mean, is that unrealistic to have something, because you're not at that point in time, you aren't transferring interbasin. You're taking the water and putting it back into within the same basin of where you took it from.
Right, and the basin transfer component is limited to 6 basins. It uses a U.S. Geologic Service characterization of watersheds, and there are only 6 of those watersheds in the state. There's Champlain, Memphremagog, Upper Connecticut, Lower Connecticut, and Hudson River, and there's one other that I'm missing. But so they only look at the interbasin component when you're moving that water from, say, Champlain to Connecticut. So that's one component, and put that aside. The other component is if you're just taking water out of the surface water, the concern is that withdrawal can affect the water quality standards. And the Federal Clean Water Act requires states to maintain water quality standards to protect the traditional uses of the water. And the traditional uses of the water are things like irrigation, development, aquatic biota, recreation, aesthetics. So if the water withdrawal is going to impair, say, aquatic biota, that there isn't enough habitat there for fish or other species that use that water, then that's a violation of the Vermont Water Quality Standards, which is a violation of the Federal Clean Water Act. And so what this program is partly intended to do is to regulate, oversee those types of withdrawals to make sure that the state's water quality standards are not being violated. So it's interbasin transfer and surface water withdrawal. They're two different components of the bill.
Yes, Bertha.
Mr. O'Grady, right now, there's no registration required, or like, if somebody's pulling the water out, they just pull the water out, or what's required now?
So what is required is that the agency of Natural Resources regulates this activity under what's called the agency procedure for determining acceptable minimum stream flows. And it lists the types of activities that have to go through an analysis of their use of the water. Domestic water supplies, for example, hydroelectric, hydromechanical, snowmaking. They're all regulated under separate regulatory programs. You know, your domestic water supply is a public water supply. That gets a permit from A&R. Snowmaking, I already talked about how they get a permit. Hydroelectric, they get their permit from FERC, or if they're not FERC regulated, they get it from the Public Utility Commission. Everything else is generally considered a de minimis withdrawal, and you have to implement the calculation for what is a de minimis withdrawal.
And if you make a de minimis withdrawal, you don't have to report it or anything. You just say,
right.
I did the calculations, it was de minimis, so I don't need to tell anybody.
Right. And a de minimis withdrawal, you just need a withdrawal rate equal to or less than 0.005 cubic feet per second times the drainage area in square miles at the proposed withdrawal site, or 5% of the 7Q10 stream flow is considered. I don't think people are doing that.
I can't even read it.
I don't think they would even know how to do it. I suppose you'd have to hire a consultant.
If you were a big enough company, you would.
So on one of these projects, Michelle, maybe, but on one of these projects where state involved, they're rebuilding a road, they're doing paving, they're doing all of that. Who's on that site for this? Is somebody's always there for the state? Who's there for the state?
So Michelle Bluepower, Vermont Agency of Transportation. We have on-site construction engineers who are charged with overseeing the contractor and the activities that are occurring on each project. And if you need more details about what they're doing, Andrea can let you know.
Oh, that's fine. So there's people on the site that if they really felt concerned or something, that they're gonna say, hey,
Yes, that's exactly.
this just isn't right.
There's an inspector to
Yeah.
check paving standards.
But they wouldn't be at the water withdrawal, they'd be at the
Right.
construction.
In all likelihood, they're not going to be everywhere. Like we have testing people who go to concrete plants and they're sampling on a continuous basis so that we know what's going into individual projects. But we're not monitoring every activity that a contractor.
But once, so you move onto a site, today you're gonna draw water from a different area that the person drawing water can say, hey, can I show you where I'm drawing this water from? Are you cool with this, or not gonna happen?
I would say that in terms of a consistent oversight specific to water withdrawal, we would have to have a procedure, documentation, records. You know, you heard Mr. O'Grady talk about sort of the calculations that would be needed in particular instances. And that would be if we were regulated on every site.
Right.
And if we were regulated by a general permit for a specific scale of withdrawal, then we might have procedures as to how we determine whether or not we're above or below. Those would probably be calculated and built into the contract with the contractor, the agreement with the contractor, so that they had terms in their agreement with us saying, here's how they will make sure they're meeting the standards. Then if they don't meet the standards, it's upon them, not the state, to address that.
So what we have here is a request and supported by AOT to have a carve out of these transportation projects for the reasons that we've heard. And that would deal with all of this. You would not register, you would not be subject to a permit over and above all the permitting you're doing now.
So I think Matt actually is raising his hand. It would be better for him to articulate the scope of what he's suggesting? Because it's not just about AOT, there's.
No,
other-
it was municipal roads as well, so.
Okay.
My only point was, what is AOT's position on this?
Matt, or you,
Agreed.
you were gonna mention something?
You agree with the contract?
Yes,
We agree with having
A carve
a
out.
carve out.
Okay, go ahead.
So before you answer, Matt, I just say this, I'm debating on, yeah, I support the carve out, but I'm also wondering if we just need to study this more since the 5,000 seems so much lower and it's unclear, but then maybe it's a broad.
They did have a study group, I thought, but it kind of got compromised by COVID. Maybe you can clarify that again. Are we gonna study the study?
I like that.
Oh,
In a report, we need a report.
jeez. Oral and in writing.
Well, we got 4 minutes left, so let's see what you can give us.
okay, I'll be brief. So we do agree that we have no problem participating with the registration and reporting program. We're absolutely happy with that because we do agree that with climate change, there is challenges to our waterways and we need to have the best information possible in order to do that. And we also believe that with a registration system, just like we talked about with your residential contractor bill, if you have a registration system with the ANR, if for example, ANR says the Dog River is unsafe to take water from, they can actually send out a bulletin to the registrants within their system and say, please do not take water out of this impaired waterway. So we believe that the registration system is fair. It's equitable, I believe, and it'll prepare us for dealing with climate change down the road. My specific ask was simply on the permitting piece because we don't have the ability to wait several months or again, I respect the rulemaking process, but if we don't have a carve out, it's arguable that the agency would make the argument during rulemaking that your prescriptive language didn't implicitly exempt this type of use of the water, that then therefore your intent would be to regulate us as well.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could just add a couple more points. I think sort of given where we are now, the carve out is the best option forward for us. But getting back to the conversation at hand in the study group, VTrans was not part of that study group. It wasn't part of the legislation to involve VTrans in that. And I believe that is because it, like Matt mentioned earlier, it started with a different intent and then it evolved. And I think a lot of the things that we're talking about, the thresholds and how low those are compared to other states, those items would have been addressed in the study group had other partners been involved. And we didn't get that opportunity. So here we are, and we're trying to make sort of the best of the situation at this point, but it could always go back. I'll just leave it at that, I guess.
The committee seems to think that maybe when you testify across the hall that we are concerned about it and if there's something we can do. I think that's the consensus I get here. So you're going to testify there today, Matt, or tomorrow or next week?
I have testified and I've been sending language back and forth with the committee and I'm really hoping that they consider putting that in. It makes sense. I do believe that Peter Walk at DEC is supportive of this language as well, although I am absolutely confident that the water advocates are not. So I hope that they will put it in. If they do not, then I'm asking this committee to make a motion on the floor to help us handle this.
Okay, any further questions? Yes.
Would that be a motion on the floor, or can we just ask to have this come through Senate Transportation?
Well, I guess we have to get to that point. Maybe we could ask for the bill if that's the case. But it would be helpful if you stated to them that we are.
Well, you could always send a letter saying we've
Yeah.
taken testimony and at this point support, you know, the reporting, the registration, but not to move forward or not to include these projects in the permitting requirement.
Is the committee comfortable in having that sent to the committee? Or?
But we haven't had any, the issue is, did you take testimony? You said other people are not going to be satisfied with this, Matt. And I don't know, if they're going to say, well, you only took one, testimony from one perspective.
The reason why they didn't like exception language is they realize what is happening actively right now is that a bunch of people who were left out of the process found out about it and are now asking for exceptions. So there is no logical argument that the water advocates have against an exception, other than that they don't want other folks like the golf courses and the farmers and everybody else to come out looking for an exception. That's the only logic I was given.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay, opening the door for one is gonna put pressure to open it wider.
Well, it makes sense that you'd want to hear from all people that are gonna be impacted, wouldn't it?
yeah, it's a serious issue.
It is. I mean, you just can't, well, you shouldn't, as you've said about rulemaking, point well taken. We should probably hear from everybody.
The 5,000 is concerning, if that's,
Very low, but I would gather.
how do you calculate it?
I don't even know what 5,000.
So,
What are those big milk tankers? How many gallons a day?
Say, what are they, Matt?
So the average size of a water tanker that we're using is 4,500 gallons. They range from 3,000 to 4,500 to, I believe, 6,000 is the maximum size. But in general, the folks that I've polled have purchased and used the 45,000 gallon ones.
I'd say a milk truck is like double that.
Yeah, anyways, yeah.
okay, well, thank you very much. And
Thank you.
we'll continue if we have to. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, committee, we're up on the floor, so we got a break to, I guess it's August as a whole.
I think so, that's. the
11 o'clock,
goal.
that's what I was told yesterday. So, we got a couple minutes to-
Are you still on